The knock came just after noon, sharp and unexpected, cutting through the quiet of the house like a sudden thought. Laura Bennet paused in her kitchen, her hand still on the mug she had warmed but not yet sipped. Outside, rain slid down the windows in thin silver lines, turning the street into a soft blur. She wasn't waiting for anyone. No friends lived close. No family dropped by. The sound felt out of place, and for a moment she considered letting it pass. Laura was 45, and she had learned to live with silence. The house in suburban Oregon had once been full voices, arguments, laughter, slammed doors, but now it held only her footsteps and the ticking clock above the stove. Her divorce 3 years earlier had not been loud or dramatic. It had been quiet, careful, and final. Her daughter had left for college in Canada, chasing a future Laura was proud of but deeply missed. Days like this one were predictable, and that was how Laura survived them. The knock came again. Firmer this time, she set the mug down and walked to the door, her movements steady, her mind already rehearsing a quick thank you and goodbye. When she opened it, the sight surprised her enough that she blinked. A young man stood on her porch, rain dotted across his jacket, holding a brown paper bag against his chest. He was tall but not imposing, with a tired face that carried calm instead of rush. His eyes lifted to meet hers, and he smiled not wide, not forced, just polite and warm. "Laura Bennet?" he asked. "Yes," she answered. "A little slower than usual." "Delivery," he said, extending the bag. "Sorry about the weather." She noticed his name tag as she reached for the package. Ethan. The name stayed with her longer than it should have. Their fingers didn't touch, but the space between them felt oddly noticeable. Laura signed the device he held out, her handwriting careful, almost formal. "Thank you," she said. "You're welcome." "Have a good day," he replied. That should have been the end of it. He turned to leave, already stepping down the porch, but Laura found herself watching him longer than necessary. Not because of attraction in the usual sense, but because something about his presence had disrupted her quiet. It wasn't dramatic. It was subtle, like a soft wind through a closed room. She closed the door and leaned against it for a moment, confused by her own reaction. She told herself it was nothing. A stranger. A delivery. A moment that would pass. Still, as she carried the bag to the kitchen, she felt unsettled in a way she couldn't explain. Laura unpacked the groceries slowly, placing each item where it belonged. Apples into the bowl. Bread on the counter. Soup into the pantry. The routine grounded her, but her thoughts kept drifting back to the porch, to the calm in his voice, to the way he had looked at her with curiosity, not with judgment, but as if she were simply a person worth acknowledging. She shook her head and smiled faintly at herself. She was overthinking. That happened more often lately. Quiet gave the mind too much space. The afternoon passed, rain easing into a light mist. Laura spent time reading by the window, then folding laundry, then scrolling through photos on her phone she rarely opened. Pictures of her daughter smiling in a dorm room. A holiday photo from years ago when life felt fuller and heavier at the same time. She set the phone down, her chest tight, stood up to make dinner earlier than planned. Another knock came just before evening. This time, Laura froze. Her heart reacted before her mind did, a quick, unexpected jump. She told herself not to assume, not to hope, and walked to the door with a steady face. When she opened it, Ethan stood there again, holding a small box. "Sorry," he said quickly. "Separate delivery." They split the order. Laura nodded, a little embarrassed by the warmth rising to her face. She signed again, thanked him again. He hesitated this time, just a second longer than before. "Hope the rain didn't ruin your plans," he said. "I didn't have any," she replied before thinking. He smiled, softer now. "Sometimes that's okay." She watched him leave again, and when the door closed, she felt something shift. It wasn't happiness. It wasn't desire. It was recognition. The sense that her quiet life had been briefly noticed by someone passing through. Laura spent the evening restless. She moved from room to room, adjusting lamps, straightening cushions, doing things that didn't need to be done. She thought about how easy the conversation had been, how natural. She reminded herself of her age, of boundaries, of reality. He was young. He was working. He was kind. That was all. But as night settled in and the rain stopped, Laura stood by the window and looked out at the street. The reflection in the glass showed a woman she barely recognized, not because she looked different, but because she felt awake in a way she hadn't for a long time. She went to bed later than usual, listening to the quiet hum of the house. Sleep came slowly. Her thoughts drifted not to the past or the future, but to the present moment she hadn't expected. A knock, a voice, a reminder. Laura didn't know it yet, but that small interruption had already done something powerful. It had cracked the shell she'd built around her heart, not to let someone in, but to let herself feel again. And that was the shock she never saw coming. The next week moved faster than Laura expected, as if time had decided to rush past her instead of dragging its feet. She filled her days with small tasks, work emails, cleaning, long walks around the neighborhood, but her mind stayed alert, waiting. When the doorbell rang again on Wednesday afternoon, she didn't jump this time. She already knew who it might be. Ethan stood on the porch, holding a box under one arm and a handheld scanner in the other. His hair was slightly messy and his jacket was lighter than before. The rain had stopped for good and the air felt fresh, back again. He said with a soft laugh. "Looks like it," Laura replied. Surprised at how natural her voice sounded, they exchanged the package quickly. But this time neither of them rushed away. Ethan glanced at the flowers near the door, small and bright. "You take good care of these," he said. "They look strong." Laura smiled. "They don't need much. Just attention." He nodded, as if the words meant more than flowers. Then he thanked her and left, but the moment stayed with her long after the door closed. Days passed. The deliveries continued. Sometimes it was groceries, sometimes books or home supplies. Laura told herself she wasn't ordering more than usual, but she didn't cancel anything either. Each visit was brief, respectful, and simple. Yet something invisible was growing between those short moments. Their conversations stayed safe. Weather changes, road repairs, long shifts, short weekends. Ethan never asked personal questions, and Laura never offered more than she should. Still, she noticed small things. He remembered her name without looking. He asked if the stairs were slippery after rain. He once reminded her to check a fragile label. Before lifting a box, she began to wait for the sound of his truck without admitting it to herself. One afternoon, Laura opened the door with a tired face. Work had been heavy, and the quiet felt louder than usual. Ethan noticed immediately. Long day. He asked, she hesitated, then nodded. Just one of those weeks. "Well," he said gently, handing her the package. "I hope it gets lighter." The words were simple, but they reached somewhere deep. After he left, Laura stood holding the box longer than needed, her throat tight. No one had spoken to her like that in a long time, not with care, not without expectation. That evening, Laura sat alone at her dining table, the chair across from her empty. She thought about how strange it was to feel seen by someone she barely knew. She told herself to be careful. She wasn't lonely enough to mistake kindness for something else. Or at least, that's what she believed. Ethan, meanwhile, drove his route with steady focus. He didn't think of Laura as often as she thought of him, but when he did, it was with quiet respect. He saw her as someone who carried strength without showing it, someone who listened with her eyes, someone who reminded him of calmer days. Their worlds touched only at the front door. But even that felt like enough. One evening, the sky darkened early, and the wind returned. Laura heard the doorbell and opened it to find Ethan looking slightly worn, his shoulders tense. "Busy day?" she asked. "Yeah," he admitted. "Long routes. Not many breaks." She hesitated, then stepped back slightly. "Would you like some water?" The question surprised them both. Ethan paused, then nodded. If it's not a problem, they stayed by the doorway, keeping space, keeping things right. Laura handed him a glass of water, and he drank slowly, thanking her twice. The moment felt human, grounded, and safe. "Take care of yourself," she said when he left. I will, he replied. You too. That night, Laura slept deeply for the first time in weeks. As the days went on, visits became part of her routine, but the feelings inside her remained carefully guarded. She wasn't chasing anything. She wasn't expecting more. Yet she couldn't deny the warmth that followed each encounter. One afternoon, Ethan arrived later than usual. Laura had almost given up on seeing him that day when the bell rang. He looked apologetic. Running behind, he said, I didn't forget. I didn't think you did, she answered honestly. The words surprised her. They lingered between them like a soft truth. Ethan smiled, then stepped away, leaving Laura standing in the doorway with a calm she hadn't felt in years. That evening, Laura reflected on the quiet change in her life. Nothing dramatic had happened. No lines had been crossed. No promises made. Yet something inside her had shifted. She felt awake, not young, not reckless, just alive. She realized then that attraction didn't always come with intention. Sometimes it came as recognition, as understanding, as a reminder that the heart still works, even after loss. And though she didn't know where this path led, Laura knew one thing clearly: whatever this was, it mattered more than she had expected. The delivery came on a quiet afternoon when the sky was clear and the air felt still. Laura opened the door expecting the usual exchange, but Ethan wasn't holding a package. His hands were empty, and for the first time he looked unsure of himself. I was nearby, he said carefully. I finished early today. Laura paused. This was new, unexpected. She searched his face for something improper and found none. Only honesty and a bit of nervousness. Is everything okay? She asked. He nodded. Yeah, You mentioned once that your daughter was away. I thought maybe the house feels quiet sometimes. The words landed softly but deeply. Laura stepped back, leaving the door open. Would you like to sit for a minute? She asked, pointing to the porch chairs. They sat with space between them, the wooden boards warm from the sun. Cars passed in the distance. A dog barked somewhere down the street. Everything felt normal, yet important. Ethan looked at his hands before speaking. My mother passed away when I was young, he said. She lived alone, too. You remind me of her. Not the sadness, the strength. Laura listened without interrupting. Her chest tightened, but she stayed calm. She understood loss in ways she never wanted to. She taught me to respect people, he continued, especially women who carry their lives quietly. I hope this doesn't sound strange. Doesn't, Laura said. Thank you for telling me. They sat in silence, comfortable and steady. Laura felt something clear, then not attraction that demanded action, but connection that asked for care. She saw him not as a young man passing through, but as a person shaped by absence and responsibility. I didn't want to cross the line, Ethan said. I just wanted you to know that your kindness matters. Laura smiled, her eyes wet but steady. So does yours. Footsteps approached from down the sidewalk. A neighbor waved politely. Reality returned, grounding the moment. Ethan stood. I should go. Yes, Laura said softly. He hesitated, then added, some people enter our lives just to remind us we're not invisible. Then he walked away. Laura stayed on the porch long after he was gone. The air felt different now, lighter. He hadn't stayed long. He hadn't promised anything. Yet something inside her had shifted for good. That evening, Laura cooked dinner with care, even though she ate alone. She noticed how calm she felt. Not hopeful in a foolish way. Not sad either. Just present. Days passed, and Ethan returned to his regular route. Deliveries came and went, but their conversations changed. They were quieter now, more respectful of the truth they both understood. The porch meeting had clarified everything. This connection was not meant to grow into something else. It was meant to be what it already was. Laura appreciated that more than she expected. One afternoon, Ethan delivered a final package. He smiled, but there was a softness in his eyes, as if he already knew this was the last time. Take care. Laura, he said. You too, Ethan. The door closed, and that chapter ended without drama. In the days that followed, Laura noticed changes in herself. She signed up for a local book club. She started walking farther than before. She laughed more easily when she spoke to her daughter on the phone. The quiet in the house no longer felt heavy. She understood now that the shock wasn't about age or attention. It was about being reminded of her worth at a moment she had forgotten it. Ethan didn't come back, but the effect of his presence stayed. Laura moved forward not with regret but with gratitude. Some connections are not meant to last. They arrive, do their work, and leave quietly. And sometimes that is exactly what the heart needs. The morning felt brighter than usual, even though nothing special was planned. Laura woke early, made coffee, and opened the curtains wide. Sunlight filled the room, touching corners that had stayed dull for years. The house was still quiet, but it no longer felt empty. It felt peaceful. Weeks had passed since Ethan's last visit. At first, Laura noticed his absence in small ways. The sound of delivery trucks passing without stopping. The doorbell ringing for someone else. Then, slowly, the noticing faded. What remained was something calmer and stronger. Laura moved through her days with new energy. She returned phone calls she had ignored. She cleaned out old drawers, letting go of things she no longer needed. She donated clothes she hadn't worn since her marriage ended. Each small action felt like progress. One afternoon, she joined a local book club at the community center. She almost turned back at the door, but she didn't. The group was warm and welcoming. They talked about stories, about life, about change. Laura listened more than she spoke, but when she did speak, her voice felt steady and clear. That evening, she called her daughter in Canada. They talked longer than usual. Laura laughed freely, surprising both of them. "You sound happy," her daughter said. "I feel lighter," Laura replied honestly. As days passed, Laura began walking every morning. She greeted neighbors she had never spoken to before. She noticed trees changing color. She noticed herself breathing more deeply than one afternoon. A small envelope arrived in the mail. Laura stood still when she saw it. The handwriting was neat but simple. She knew before opening it who it was from. Inside was a short note. "Thank you for reminding me that kindness matters. I'll always remember you." Ethan Laura sat down slowly. She read the note again, then once more. There was no sadness in her chest, only warmth. She folded the paper carefully and placed it in a drawer where she kept meaningful things. She didn't cry. She smiled. That night, Laura cooked a full meal for herself. She set the table properly. She ate without rushing. She felt complete in a way she hadn't felt in years. The connection she and Ethan shared had never needed more. It had done exactly what it was meant to do. It had arrived quietly, changed something important, and stepped away without damage. Laura understood now that life didn't always offer second chances the way people expected. Sometimes it offered reminders. Reminders that you still mattered, that your heart still worked, that you were still seen. Months later, Laura booked a flight to Toronto to visit her daughter. She packed carefully, excited in a calm, steady way. At the airport, she watched people pass with their own stories, their own connections, their own brief encounters that might change everything on the plane. She looked out the window as the city disappeared below. She thought about how close she had come to closing herself off completely. How easy it would have been to ignore that first knock. She was grateful she hadn't. When Laura returned home weeks later, the house welcomed her like an old friend. She placed fresh flowers by the door. She started planning small trips, small joys, small changes. The shock she once felt had turned into clarity. She knew now that love didn't always mean holding on. Sometimes it meant learning how to move forward with grace. As Laura stood by her window one quiet evening, watching the sky darken gently, she felt no longing, only peace. And that, she realized, was the most unexpected gift of all.